Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
What's happening, Brian? Good to see you, my friend. This is your second appearance on the podcast, which means, actually, I don't know what it means. That and $1 probably won't buy you a cup of coffee, but I appreciate you coming on again for us to discuss some fresh topics.
Okay, man. Hey, I'm looking forward to it. I mostly, I love podcasts, right since the beginning. I was listening to podcasts like when there was none around, before Perpetual Chess, before they had these other guys doing it before him, when basically there was Danny Kopech and Alexander Koschenek, and that was it, and they didn't even do much. So I'm just living in this great podcast world, and what I like about your podcast is there's a ton of podcasts right now. They're constantly interviewing GMs and great players, and that's wonderful. I certainly love that and listen to it all the time. But you've carved out this little niche, which really focuses on practical topics in a very good way. You're doing a good job with it. So, I'm happy to help you in any way and to be a part of it. And listen, if you want to talk to me, that's great. If you want to talk to me twice, I'm really looking forward to, again, doing the podcast.
No, cool. I appreciate it. Yeah, I do try to keep it focused on what it's like actually playing at the club level. And even when I do get titled players on this, because, my guests, some are titled players, some are amateurs, some are teachers, I always try to get someone who's going to bring an angle towards the amateur player. That's pretty much, like, I don't ask someone to be on it just because of the title. It's what can they bring to help amateurs and help us at this level? That type of thing. Like, for example, when I had on Grandmaster John Ems to cap off last season, it wasn't so much he's a grandmaster, it's that he wrote the competitive guide, the name is escaping me, but the book he wrote, the Tournament Player's Guide to Competitive Chess or whatever it was. I'm drawing a blank on the title, but the book he wrote, it's really meant for tournament players and using the ability that you have, because his whole thing is you can increase your rating probably 100 to 200 points with the abilities you already have if you just change some mindsets about certain things. So, whenever I ask somebody, there's always a purpose. So yeah, I appreciate that about, kind of keeping it niche. That's kind of what I want to do. So we have a big cheating scandal going on right now. Cheating is now part of the chess culture. Obviously, we have the Magnus Niemann situation. I don't want to get too much into that now because honestly, for me, it's getting almost annoying, the discussion about that, because what's bothering me is that it's taking a cheating scandal to sort of bring chess into the mainstream and to bring it into the mainstream news. Like I read the Wall Street Journal and you really don't see articles on chess too much, but now you're seeing one almost every other day. And, of course, Magnus accusing Niemann of cheating, and now Niemann's filing a defamation lawsuit. Everybody knows the details. I won't go into it, but the only thing I'm going to say about it, it's just a shame that that's what's taking over the discourse, and if you look on Twitter and social media, but, that sells, that's what people find interesting, is a scandal like that rather than the game itself. But I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, I'll share mine as a TD, but I kind of want you to run with this as far as how cheating has affected chess and the potential for more damage, what we can do to battle it. However you want to take it, I'll let you run with that.
Yeah, I definitely, I agree with you about, the Niemann thing. It was interesting and exciting at first, but it's kind of gotten beaten to death. And guess what? If it goes to trial or something, it's going to be there again in all the papers. But to me, the big thing, and actually Magnus mentioned this, is that it's bringing to light the importance of cracking down on this cheating. Now, I first I had a Dell Pocket PC, an Axum, years ago. This was like around 2000, years ago I had it. And I was like, oh my God, this is very dangerous for tournament chess. I wrote into the Chess Cafe. I think there was this tournament director, Gert Gayson, a famous tournament director, had a column at the Chess Cafe. And, basically discussing, what's going to go on. We have this Pocket PC now, we need to start enforcing things because cheating's going to be rampant. I think they already had a few cases even back then. And we had that discussion, and that was 2003. And here we are 20 years later, and very little has changed, in terms of enforcement. There's a couple of things, but not a lot, on cracking down on this. And it's a major issue. I mean, this could really, just end chess to some extent, because this is what I really think is one of the biggest problems that's not talked about with the cheating. Obviously, if someone cheats, that's really bad. It's the opponent loses a game he didn't deserve to lose. It could affect prize money, things like that. But the other thing that's not talked much is, well, I guess with the Neiman concert, it's talked a little bit, is the false accusation. So like you and I, here we are, we study chess, we love chess, we play chess. Whenever you do something like that, you want to be able to fantasize. You want to be like, hey, I'm Neil Bell and I beat like 4 masters in a row, and I had this incredible tournament, and you should be able to fantasize about that, and hey, God willing, even do it. But now the end of your fantasy is everyone's saying Neil Bellin cheated, obviously I'm just using you as an example. It could be me or anyone who has a great performance, and when you're working so hard and doing stuff and trying to improve, you shouldn't have that asterisk at the end that, well, if you do all this, people will probably think you cheated. So that's where I think it really hurts. As well as other ways. So it's very concerning. I think they need to enforce things. I did have a couple of ideas, and I'd be interested in your insight as a tournament director with a lot of experience at this point. So first off, I think, it's to some extent going to be a losing battle. It's like, the battle on drugs, you're never going to be able to completely stop it. So, it's about limitation, And so one thing is everything's getting smaller. They're even talking about brain implants now. Elon Musk has some sort of company that does that. They're actually in human trials now. I mean, I'm sure they're going to get to the point where there's contact lenses or things you can put on your skin that are computers. So it's going to get even worse, But, you just have to, do what you can and limit it as much as possible. Now, here's some ideas I had. One idea that I thought would be interesting is you should never be leaving the playing room unless it's to go to the bathroom or some sort of emergency that the tournament director is aware of. Okay? So otherwise, there's no reason to leave the playing hall. If you don't walk around to look at other games, that's fine, but no leaving the playing hall. Probably there shouldn't be spectators in the playing hall either. Again, it depends on the type of tournament. That's another place where your insight's interesting because you're a local tournament director with casual players, and it's a little bit different than, a continental chess event or, something that Magnus Carlsen might play in. So there are 3 different levels, which you'd have to look at how hard you want to enforce each. But anyway, getting back to what I said, I would like it, especially in like a continental chess event, if you want to go to the bathroom, you have a little log that you have to quickly scribble down the move number of your game, when you left, the time, when you leave, and then you come back and you write the time that you came back. And I think this would be very useful because, if someone's trying to determine if someone cheated, again, it's very hard to catch them, 100% unless they take off their shoes and there's a computer. So you do have to look at the game scores, see, where things maybe look fishy. And one of the things that I would want as a TD is to go, okay, he left on move 23. That's exactly when the guy did the knight sack. And then he was in the bathroom, for this amount of time, so different stuff like that. Also, if you go to the bathroom at a critical point, and you're not coming back right away or something, that's a little fishy too. You wouldn't win a game. Okay, it's possible. Don't get me wrong. People have bathroom issues, but I think that log would be helpful. So that's one thing. The other thing I was thinking about is with the increase in cheating technology, you also have detection technology that's increasing. So for example, cameras. It's so easy to get cameras now, security cameras all over, and cameras are much cheaper, and you can have a lot of them. They have these security wands, that you see on TV that on the internet, the chess events that they use, and I'm sure there's other devices. What I would like is FIDE or the USCF or some sort of chess organization, maybe even a marketer or whatever, but to put out kits for TDs. That if a TD, when it said, hey, I want to run this event, it's going to be prize money or whatever it is, and I want to get security. Right now, they have to kind of do it all on their own, figure out what they need, haggle, this or that. Instead, you could have an organization, okay, FIDE, I want to buy your TD kit. Now, FIDE or the organization, hopefully they can organize some sort of a, wholesale price, because they're going to be buying in bulk. And FIDE would do all the research, what you need. They'd have some advice on how to use it. And you just get your kit. And then you'd have maybe a couple of cameras in it, maybe a security wand. I'm not an expert on exactly, but they'd have what it is. They'd have the price. They could also put in incentives, like maybe you don't have to pay a certain amount of rating fees or something like that to encourage TDs to get it. And I think that would be helpful also. That's another idea I have. Well, what do you think so far? Am I making sense?
You're making a lot of sense. No, you're making a lot of sense. It's some very interesting things. Now, one thing that I've said, and I'm guessing I'm in the minority on this, but at these amateur tournaments, they need to get rid of these large cash prizes. I really think that will, disincentivize cheating. And I've said this before. Anyone who's been listening to the podcast has heard me give this speech a number of times. Even for adult amateur tournaments, give like trophies or something. Give trophies, something tangible instead of these cash prizes, which play to a certain crowd and is going to invite certain people to cheat. Not that they shouldn't do it, but even as somebody who's a little bit older, like, because people think, well, trophies, that's for kids, that's for scholastic tournaments. I mean, I don't know about you, Brian. I would love a trophy. You kidding me?
Right.
I would love a trophy, have it at home, and it's whatever. It's in your office, it's in your living room. So I'm not a big fan of the big cash prizes at these events. Now, I guess they need it to attract, because they want to attract the GM section, and there's other reasons that I'm sure I'm not getting into, but that's something that's always bothered me. It's the Royal game. It should be about the game itself, and the money just changes it. I'm not going to get into like money is the root of all evil and that whole thing, because that's too dramatic. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go down that road, but I really question those large money prizes, at these amateur events. So that's one thing. I'm saying it this way. Let's at least have a conversation about that. Let's at least revisit that, and let's talk about, is that something that should change? That's all I'm saying. Like that needs to be on the table. If there's going to be like a discourse about how to stop cheating, that needs to be part of the agenda. That's all I'm saying there. Now, as far as my own experience as a TD, the only legitimate cheating incident we had at the club was a sandbagger. I'm sure you heard about that. It was a player well over 2,000, and he accepted some quick draws against lower rated players. And what's great about the guys at the club is everybody kind of noticed this. Like, it was so in your face. Like it was like stupid cheating, as they call it. Like if you're going to do it, obviously no one's advocating that, but if you're going to do it, at least try to make some effort to conceal it. It was so grossly obvious. And then, I had to file an ethics complaint with the USCF, which I won. They voted unanimously. Now, the only thing that bothered me, his punishment was that he was banned for a year, which is, I think the analogy I used when I first told this story was, I hurt myself more shaving. You know what I'm saying? Like, he just got banned for a year, which I don't think was a strong enough punishment. But, I was just going to say, the other thing that I've seen, or that I worry about, is, we're talking about cheating using a computer, smartphones, the apps on the smartphones now, these chess engines are rated like 3,000. I mean, they can beat. So in your pocket, you have a device that can beat the world's strongest players. And, there's always an issue with someone going to leave the room and check the phone. Now, about getting up from the board. Now, you made an interesting point about how, there's all these false accusations. Like for me personally, I do get up from the board a lot because for two reasons. Number one is that it sort of helps me focus, because like a problem with me is that I'll see a difficult position and then maybe I'll get impatient or I won't think it through. And I find if I get up from the board and then come back to it, it's like, wow, now it's clear. All I had to do was this.
I'm not against people getting up from the board. It's leaving the playing hall. There's a difference. Yeah, getting up from the board, of course. Yeah, no, I actually don't do it, but most people do, and that's totally fine for the reasons you say. But it's leaving the playing hall, especially at a continental chess event. As I say, the only reason to leave the playing hall, bathroom or some sort of emergency that the tournament director is aware of, and then it's I can understand. But yeah, it's the walking around stuff. I mean, not the walking around is fine.
The other thing I've had to deal with, sometimes I'll have parents kind of hovering over the board in critical positions, and it's always uncomfortable, but I've had to kind of say, can you step back? Or some of them, they'll be making certain facial expressions, and a lot of times, to be fair, I think it's inadvertent. They don't realize they're doing it. So it's not to the point where it's not like a scholastic tournament where parents are not allowed in the playing hall at all. But I've had to ask parents a few times, can you just kind of step away from the board? There was one father in particular that I can think of where this was a bit of an issue. Nothing crazy, nobody really like arguing with me, but you do have to step in sometimes. But other than that sandbagging incident, we've been pretty fortunate at the club. It's a good group of people, but it's something you worry about. But I also think if someone did try to do that, they would, especially at the amateur level, they would get caught sooner or later. See, when a GM does it, it's different because they're already so talented. So you can argue, well, how do you know it's the engine? They're a grandmaster. They play those types of moves. But when an amateur does it, if you see like a 1400 player, playing like 99% of the engine's first choice or something like that, it's a little more questionable because you wouldn't expect it from a player of that rating. Whereas like if a 2700 player does it, you'll just say, well, they're 2700. That's what they do. So, and as far as the cheat detection methods, like Ken Regan has the computer algorithm. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is just my sort of armchair amateur, my sort of bar stool opinion. I'm not convinced that Ken Regan's algorithm is as strong as some people say. And he even said, he was on a podcast, I forgot which one because he's been on a few of them lately. And if I heard correctly, he said, because the question that people ask him, and this is fascinating, well, what if someone just consults a computer like one move per game, or only one or two moves per game? Like you use it like just enough to just give you enough of an edge to win. And I believe he said, he goes, if they only use it once a game, he really can't catch them. If they use it like 2 or 3 times, let's say they use it 3 times per game, then he said he'll catch them, but it might take him a number of games to do that. He needs to see a pattern. But I'm not fully convinced that that's foolproof. I believe it was Fabiano too, who said he wasn't quite convinced that Regan's algorithm is as, amazing as some make it out to be. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think it's valid. I do think it's accurate. I do think it's a tool that can be used, but I don't know if it's the be all and end all. So I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. But as far as bringing it back to your original question, as far as the amateur level, I really haven't had anything too crazy at the club. And I really think as far as cheating at the amateur level, that's probably a bigger issue at the major events. Like we were saying before, like the CCA tournaments, I would imagine that's more of a problem. Now, from what I'm hearing, I haven't played in one of those events in a while, but I'm hearing that the security and the anti-cheating measures at the CCA tournaments aren't really the strongest. That's just what I've heard. Don't quote me on that. This is just sort of water cooler talk that I'm hearing. So that's my take on it. I really haven't had any sort of major incidents. It's not like I'm dealing with this on a regular basis. But again, your local club is a bit of a different situation from like the major events.
Yeah, exactly. You have to define which one you're doing. But well, a couple of points. First off, I agree. I don't think because the risk you take when you cheat, you know, even if you're not absolutely caught, like people are going to start suspecting you. You know, so like what you just said, if a 1400 did, and again, I don't think many 1400s would do it, but if they are doing it, you know, okay, if they're doing it so obviously that every one of their moves matches the computer, you're going to make a pretty strong case. That would be ridiculous. They wouldn't be 1400 for long, that's for sure. But in any case, a lot of times you wouldn't be able to, quote unquote, convict them based just on the matching a computer or this or that. If it's not done, you know, I mean, to the 90, if it's not to the 99% extent, then it's ridiculous. But, you know, I would think most of the people who are caught cheating, you know, because I read about all these cases and stuff, they're normally pretty, you know, obvious. You know, they're doing it all the time. You know, that's why this Neiman thing is a little different because they're talking about someone who may or may not have done it more sophisticated. But you have like the first one was this von Neumann affair, which my accountant, FM Danny Shapiro, was involved in. He was a victim of it as well as some GMs, where the guy apparently he probably didn't even know legal moves. This happened at the World Open, I think, in 1993. That was probably one of the first major cases at the Continental Chess event. And what happened was the guy's beating GMs, and then he plays Danny Shapiro, and there's a certain point where he has to make an obvious knight recapture, and he's just sitting there thinking. He doesn't know what to do. And what people pieced together, because they never actually caught him, what happened was after the event, they asked him to play a blitz game to prove that he was, you know, the strength he exhibited, and then he just ran off and was never seen again. And Chris Chabris and some other people were trying to find out who it was, but they never did. But in any case, what happened there was against Danny Shapiro, he couldn't play this knight move. People think because he didn't even know how to play chess, really. He was just following whatever they were telling him on the walkie-talkie or whatever he was using. He had a big Rasta hat, so it was probably a headphone in there. And so anyway, a lot of the cheats who are caught are just so obvious. You know, they're copying every move, or they're normally just ridiculous. But does cheating go on? You know, again, it's a paranoid atmosphere. So I played a guy at a Continental Chess event years ago, and we were in a sharp variation of the French, and all of a sudden he went to the bathroom. Like, we were both, you know, pretty, you know, it was clear that we were kind of aware of the position's sharp, and you know, trying to make sure we got it right, because maybe it's like the 12th move or something, you know. And I sort of know him in theory, but and I know it's sharp theory, but I'm not exactly sure what I should do. And he was the same way, moving kind of tentatively. And then he went to the bathroom, and he came back, and all of a sudden he's just, you know, moving right away. You know, he knows exactly what to do. Now, did he cheat? I have no idea. Maybe he didn't, you know. But, you know, you have that kind of suspicion. And that's why I think in the long run, what you're talking about, the lower cash prizes, it's just going to happen. It just naturally, because what's going to happen is if you have enough people suspected of cheating, whether or not they're actually cheating, but if that suspicion's enough, eventually people are going to be like, I don't want to go there, pay all that entry fee, pay for that hotel, pay for the travel, prepare for the tournament, and then, you know, just some cheater's going to beat me, you know, there. So they're naturally, unless Continental Chess can figure something out, or these other tournaments with the large cash prizes, it's just going to happen. And it's not just going to happen in chess. It's going to happen in any sort of intellectual competition or educational testing, because the same devices you can use to cheat at chess, you can use to cheat in a bar exam or at a Scrabble tournament or whatever it is, you know, poker, or, you know, it's all been in the news lately. So, you know, the world's changing. It's gonna, we're not gonna know what to trust, and in the end, yeah, it probably will be, lower stakes or no stakes, and even then, I don't think it'll be entirely proof because you're going to get, chess like a lot of other competitions. It's ego driven. People want their higher ratings, things like that. So, I think even then there's going to be some cheaters, but it's much harder to do on over the board, right? If someone's going over the board, this is a tremendous amount of risk. If they were caught, their reputation's affected, this and that. So really, to do that when there's no stakes on the line, you'd have to be an idiot, but you'd probably have to be an idiot to cheat in the first place anyway. Of course, online's a whole other thing where they cheat all the time. But anyway, yeah, good point. Another funny thing you talk about the cash prize. I'll never forget. I played in the New York Open. It was like '94 or something years ago, and I played this guy, and we became friends afterwards. Tournament friends. We just would talk between rounds, this and that. And this guy had flown over from California. Back then, I was 1800, so this was the under 2000 section. And this guy flew over from California. He started off the tournament really well. He beat me. He was something like 3-0 or whatever it was. And then he lost a game or two, something like that. And he said, "Oh, I'm going back to California. I'm dropping out of the event." And I'm like, "Why would you do that?" And he's like, "Well, I'm out of the prize money now." So he paid for a flight, he paid for hotel, he paid entrance fee, and he even had a pretty good tournament, even though he was outside of the tournament. But he left, a few rounds early just because he wasn't going to win a prize. I've never understood people like that, because even with the prizes that they have in continental chess, only a few people are, by the time you take into account all the expenses, travel, hotel, everything else, you have to do really well at the tournament just to get back that, let alone, show a profit. So you get these people who it's like everything's sandbaggers, all this stuff. It's like, just go to this tournament and, maybe if you're really lucky, win, a little bit of money.
It's true what you said about people dropping out. And that's something that drives me crazy. If you look at the cross tables, even for some of these CCA events, look at how many people drop out after losing just round one.
Sure.
Or just round two. It happens at the club level also. I mean, there's more than one person here on Long Island where they lose the first round, especially if they lose the first round to a lower rated player. Let's say like a 2100 gets busted against like a 1500 player. They'll hide. They're like in witness protection. Like, I don't know, they're gone. Like, I'll get something like, Neil, I need to drop out. It's some ridiculously like lame excuse. And again, it's not my job to question. I say, okay, thanks for letting me know. But this happens all the time. Or, I've known more than one title player. Oh yeah, I just play for fun. I don't know why people are so concerned about rating. I just play for fun, but they lose a game or two to a low rated player and they're gone. You know what I'm saying?
See, I don't understand that, because you want to get the rating points back. The only time I dropped out of a tournament that I can recall, when there were a number of rounds left, I was in a NASA championship, and I lost 3 games in a row. I can't recall ever doing that before. It was definitely, one of my worst tournaments. And but then I had a drop out. I think I might have played a round or two afterwards, but not much. And I had to drop out. Now, the reason I had to drop out is well ahead of time, I was taking a group to the Nationals, Classic Nationals, and it was all planned, and, that's what I had to do. So I knew ahead of time I was dropping out of the championship. But then, yeah, after that, I got people going, "Oh, why'd you quit in the tournament? You could have, done better." And I was killing myself. That it was sort of like taking stock out when you're in a bad market like now or something. Like, I was like, okay, I'm 0-3. I'm gonna start winning. Or I don't know if I was 0-3, but whatever I was. Now I'm going to start winning because I'm going to get other people who are doing poorly. And then you start getting the rating points back, or, getting something back. At least you don't feel that you left. So, yeah, I can't imagine if I lost to a low rated, and it has happened, in the first round.
See, it depends, I think, a lot on your mindset, because some people, and sometimes I fall into this category, they sort of tilt, the term going on tilt, right? Is, let's say it's a 5-round event and they lose the first 2 games. If they're going to be so upset that they feel this need to catch up to the point where they're going to sort of play poorly, then you could argue maybe you're better off cutting your losses. Or let's say it's a 5-round event. Let's say you have a really bad outing. Let's say you lose the first 3 games, I could understand in that case dropping out simply because the last 2 games you're going to get lousy pairings. Like let's say you're a 1900 player. Yeah, like if you're a 1900 player, just to throw out a number, which is a very strong tournament player, and let's say you're playing at your local club and it's a 5-week event, and let's say for whatever reason you lose your first 3 games, so you're going into round 4 with no points. I can understand dropping out because from a rating standpoint, you're going to have 2 much lower rated players. You know, what are you going to get back? Like 4 points? Like I can understand that, but dropping out after losing just, 1 round or even 2 rounds, that doesn't make sense. Now, what I like about the club level, and I spoke about this with Dan Levin, if you have that tough loss, you have that buffer of a week in between to get it out of your system. Whereas in the major weekend events, you could have some crazy wild game, 100 moves, it's some end game, and you lose. It's like a brutal loss. Oh, and guess what? In 25 minutes, you now have to play another game. Like, I don't know how people do that.
Exactly.
Because I would be thinking about the loss, whereas like at the club, you have a week to shake it off. It's out of your system. You come back, okay, I'm fresh, I'm ready to go.
And it works in reverse too. Because so I had one of my best results. I went to Foxwood and I drew Sergey Kudrin, who's a very strong ground. It was like 2,600. By far, one of my best results, right? So the next round, which started, 20 minutes later or whatever it was, I play another guy around my rating. And of course, at this point, I'm like, oh, I'm so strong. I just drew Sergey Kudrin, So I sit down at the board just fully expecting to win. My head's in the air. And I calculate a sacrifice against a castled king on f7. And if the rook takes, I see all these, quote unquote, brilliant moves, calculate really well. I'm like, wow, I'm on fire. How do I see all this? I'm Ali Ekin. And then he takes with the king instead of the rook. And I'm like, I didn't look at that.
Okay, you've just described, probably 99% of blunders in amateur games. Oh, wait, he can also take back with this piece. Oops.
Yeah, exactly. I had another one like that. I played David Zardos. You know
Long
David,
time,
right?
but yes.
And David, would get into time pressure, and David was known, the way to beat him, he basically did a sacrifice every game, wait for him to sack, it'll be unsound, and then you'll just win. And, I had a good record against David. Anyway, one championship, again, a similar situation, I see a sacrifice, and I see that a few plots down the line, I can force a perpetual. So I'm like, okay, and this is a master championship again. So they put it in the bulletins. And so I'm looking at this, I say, this will look really nice in the championship if this works. But it's an extremely complicated sack. So, and I'm always getting into time pressure. So thinking about, I'm not concerned about time at all, because I'm like, if it doesn't work, I'll just take the perpetual. Well, it turns out, after I do the sacrifice, after, I decide I'm not going to do the sacrifice, I realized I miscalculated the perpetual. There's no perpetual there. So now, I get clobbered. I literally spent maybe an hour on the move. I have like no time left. And David, in unusual position of being way ahead of time, he wins the game. And then the funny thing is, years later, I find out that the game's been published in a book. I'm like, of all the games I've been played, that's the one. And of course, I look like a complete idiot because no one knows why, I played so badly, but that was the reason. And I'm like, oh, that's the game that makes it to a book.
Were you just like he would actually sacrifice a piece almost every game?
Well, I don't, I don't know if he kept to it, but that was generally, he did it a lot, and that's how people would generally beat him. When you play locally, you get to know the different players. Like that guy plays, this way, that guy plays that way. So yeah, David would always be doing his unsound set. No apologies to David. Sometimes they were sound. He was a creative player and he was a good player in a lot of ways. I don't even know if he's still alive. Not trying to insult him, but generally, yeah, because he liked to sacrifice. So if you played solid, he would sacrifice something, and boom.
The reason I ask, there are some players, maybe they have like an internet background or whatever. It's almost like their goal when they start a chess game is to sack a piece. I feel like for some players, they sit there, okay, what am I going to sack? I played someone the other night and I won like 2 pawns fairly early. and he saw that, but he just refused to like defend. It was like, let me just like, I thought he was gambiting or something like that, but nothing ever panned out. But I could tell every move, you know how when they're looking for, like, I could just tell in his eyes, I'm like, you're trying to sack something right now. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, there's nothing there. I'm like, all right, no, I'm not a title player, but I mean, I have a certain amount of experience. I'm like, it was a French defense, which I know well. And maybe I'm wrong, and he was very strong, by the way. He played, despite the pawn captures, I mean, he played a very thoughtful game, much higher than his rating. But I felt like every move, it was like, what can I sacrifice? It was like, how can I checkmate? And he was looking for a sack, and there was nothing there. There was nothing to sack.
Two things I'd like to mention about that. One thing, I was just talking to another local player, Nick Figueredo.
Sure.
He just made National Master, by the way. He plays
Hey, shout out to Nick. Brian, I'm sorry to cut you off. So Nick Figueredo is a master now.
Just brilliant. It's literally hot off the presses. I think like an hour ago or something, they published the results on the USCF. Anyway, Nick and I talk a lot. And we were just having a conversation. I said, when I play online, I'll sometimes I play a lot of anonymous on the line, because I'm basically doing it just to kill time, relieve stress, and I don't want to think about ratings and get hooked in it. So I'll play anonymous. So I get all players. You can get very weak players, you can get very strong players. You never know what you're getting when you play anonymous. And I'll say, whenever someone plays some crazy gambit, like the Latvian gambit, it almost always turns out that they're horrible at tactics. Like they'll play the Latvian gambit. You go, okay, I'm going to accept your gambit. And then, like 5 moves later, they're playing some sack that completely doesn't work. This morning, someone played it. He just hung his queen, a Latvian gambit. And I see that a lot online. The people who play the gambits, who you would think would be the ones who are good at tactics, are not. So that's and I do have another example of Brian being an idiot. Years ago when I was early on, I don't know how long I have been playing for, but I read Lou Hayes's tactics puzzle book. It's like a lot of puzzles, and just solving tactics. And so I go to my next tournament, and of course I just read this book, solving hundreds of tactics. And so I was doing exactly what you said. I'm playing every game, looking at every move like it's white to play and win. And there's no white to play and win. There's just no way. And so obviously, I don't remember my result, but I didn't do that well because I'm just getting time pressure and looking for things that aren't there. I think part of being a good player is knowing when to look for those tactics, and knowing when they're probably not there, like you were just saying.
Right. And probably 80% of positions, there are no immediate tactics in sight. That's why they say, like I spoke about this in the last episode, tactics. But then where a lot of amateur players mess up is in the quieter positions where you have to think of strategy and something to do. Those positions, they don't know what to do as far as planning and middle game ideas. And then they make a mistake, and then their opponent ends up with a tactical shot. And the other thing with tactics, because Brian, you echoed something that I've shared, my opinion, is that it seems now a lot of instructional videos and a lot of advice is, aggressive chess is winning chess, right? You got to play aggressive, right? Aggressive chess, that's too passive, tactics. But yet most amateur players don't have the chops, or pardon my musician's lingo, they don't have the chops or the skill to play in that style. Okay, so fine. You're going to sack a piece, or you're going to play this really sharp line. If you don't know the follow-up, what good is it? Because the thing is, when you play that very sharp tactical style, your moves have to be extremely accurate, right? Because if you sack a piece and your follow-up is wrong, guess what? You're now down a piece. Whereas,
exactly.
With a more positional style, if you make a mistake, okay, maybe you're giving up control of a square, or maybe you're, it's like something subtle, but it's not game losing. Like you're still in it, and that's the issue I have with this. Oh, you got to, aggressive chess is winning chess. Sure. But you have to have the temperament and the chops and the skill to do that. Like finding the correct move. It's like those chess puzzles, right? White to move and win. And I think so many players, they'll find that first move, which might be hard to find. It might be a sacrifice or something. They'll find the first move, but they have no idea what the follow-up is. But it's like, oh, I solved this puzzle because I got the first move right. Well, in an actual tournament game, just knowing the first move is not going to be enough for you. So what I've learned to do is if I see that in a game, something will tell me in my gut, like, okay, this sacrifice is correct. I know it's there. And you're like itching to play it. But unless I see the follow-up, I'm not going to do it.
Well, I was reading something online about this guy. He had a grandmaster coach, and so he played a game, and there was a possible sacrifice there, and he spent a lot of time calculating one way or the other, or maybe it was whether he should accept the sacrifice or not. So he spent a lot of time calculating. He wasn't sure he made the right decision, and he was really curious what his coach would tell him that he should have done. And the GM said, I wouldn't even bothered calculating that. I just would have went here. And the GM basically, played a move that wasn't critical, just some passing move where he's safe. And he goes, and the GM said, then it's like you're showing, by taking all the time, you showed that you were more confused about the position than him. I forget exactly how he put it. But the point was that, sometimes, it's not even about doing the calculation. I mean, a lot of times you do have to. But the point of this GM, sometimes just don't even go into it, So that's another sense that you have to have.
The Chess Angle is sponsored by Chessable. Many of you are already using Chessable, I know, but for those of you who haven't, I encourage you to check out their courses today. It's phenomenal stuff. They use the concept of spaced repetition to increase retention. Check out chessable.com today. There is a link in the show notes. So let's talk about chess coaching. That was a great segment, by the way. I enjoyed that discussion. We covered a lot of ground there. So let's talk about chess coaching, because a lot of amateur players and adult improvers have questions about this. So one question is, do you even need, quote unquote, do you need a chess coach? And how should a player choose a chess coach? Can you maybe give your thoughts? And for the listeners out there, Brian, in addition to being a candidate master, Brian is an extremely experienced and successful chess coach and chess educator. He's very prolific, one of the top coaches here on the island and in the New York tri-state area. So Brian is not just a player. Brian has a lot of experience teaching. In fact, that's your full-time profession. I just want the listeners to understand that Brian is eminently qualified to speak about this. So can you give us some insight? Does a player need a chess coach? How do you choose a coach? What should a good coach do? I'll let you run with that.
All right, so let's start out. First off, I always like to define there's different types of coaches depending what your goals are. So a lot of my students, and I think almost all regular chess coaches nowadays, are children. Now, with and in many cases, beginner children who don't even play, until they meet you or very little. And so now a coach, if you're coaching a child like that, and you're like, listen, you got to play in tournaments and you got to do all this homework and do all that stuff, very quickly, you're like, what are you talking about? I'm going to go do my piano lessons and karate, to heck with you, because what the coach should be trying to do is, yes, challenge the kid and obviously teach the kid, but also show him why chess is worth pursuing, what's fun about it, what's enjoyable about it, and get him excited. So when he has a chess lesson, he looks forward to it. So there's that type of coach. Now, the other type of coach that maybe someone like you or even me would hire is someone who shouldn't be getting us enthusiastic. That should be a given. He's going to show you, the work you should be doing, challenging you quite a bit, giving you the puzzles, making sure you're on the right path. Now, as far as should you get a coach, there's two big factors here. One is obviously money. Can you afford it? Coaches are expensive. And then the other thing is, this is the main benefit you're going to get from the coach. If you have to be willing to put in the work, like if you're going to make serious improvement, whatever coach you have, he's not going to be the main component. He's going to be your guide, So just like if I wanted to get good, let's say I wanted to lose a lot of weight and be in great condition, I'd hire a physical trainer. But that doesn't mean that, I see that physical trainer for a half an hour to an hour or whatever a week, and that does it. I got to run the laps and eat the stuff he tells me and do all that. Most of the work's going to be done by me. But okay, so this is where the coach comes in. So if you have a typical adult who's going to make a major improvement, or even a talented kid, it doesn't necessarily have to be adult, they have to put in the work. They're going to have to work many hours a week to make a significant difference. They're going to have to play a lot in serious, slow games. Now, if you're putting in all that time, you'd want someone who's going to say, hey, don't do this, do that. This will work, do it this way. Someone who's experienced, knowledgeable, maybe has done it themselves. That's what you want. Because you're spending all that time anyway. Again, assuming you can afford it, which not everyone can. Coaches are fairly expensive. But, if you're going to put in all that work and you can afford it, why not? If you're spending 10 hours a week studying chess, and you're doing the wrong thing, or someone could tweak it a little bit so it's going to be more effective, then obviously you should get it. And obviously you're going to be learning during the lesson, and a coach for that type of student is going to be giving you homework and reviewing what and by the way, the other thing a coach should do, even for an adult improver or even for a serious child, is make sure what they're giving them they enjoy, because there's enough ways to improve. Let's say you have like an adult improver, 1700 or whatever, and you want to give him endgame studies, but he enjoys, going through grandmaster games where they play endgames. Okay, if that's what he enjoys, he's going to get a lot from that. So you want to find something, you want to work with them. So you don't want the coach just telling the guy, do this, don't do anything else. I don't care if you don't enjoy it. Anyone, if they're not a professional, should be enjoying their chess study, but it should also be challenging. Now, so I think that's one of the things. The other thing is what I said. I think a good coach has to take into account the level of the student. That's so important. The more I teach and, talk to other teachers and stuff, the good ones, you see that. So you'll have some coaches, you'll have, like, again, a beginner kid, and they're being very, I know one coach, he refused to work with like a 6 or 7-year-old. He told the mom he has to play in 2 tournaments, every month, or one tournament. I don't remember what it was, but he basically said if the kid's not playing in tournaments, then forget it. And this is like a beginner kid, it's like, come on, you got to kind of see what their goals are, adjust your coaching for them, And of course, the mom said, okay, forget it, we're not going to take the lessons. And she probably went to some other coach who didn't have such a requirement. Because again, and even tournaments aren't for everyone. I think tournaments are great. Now, one thing, and I know I mentioned this to you before, I do think if you're serious about improving, here's another mistake that a lot of people make. I think Nate Salon or someone talked about this. A lot of people think, I'm going to do a ton of study for like 5-6 months, and then I'm going to come back to these tournaments and I'm going to get my points, like I've done so much study over 6 months. Now I go to Neil's club and I gain 300 points because I'm just so much better than I was, 5 months ago before I did that study. That's not how it works. Playing in your tournaments, or whoever's tournaments, is part of the process. So while you're doing those 5 months of study, you should be playing in over-the-board tournaments, not online, because you're not going to take it as seriously, and people don't want to play slow games as much, and there's all sorts of things, online that's different than over the board. You need to be over the board, across from a person with the clock ticking, trying out your sacrifices or whatever it is that you're working on, and you're going to get immediate feedback, and you're going to say, gee, I thought that book was helping me, but it didn't. Maybe, maybe my problem's this instead, or maybe you will see some things. It's also rare that you'll read a chess book or do an exercise and immediately it's applicable. A lot of times you'll learn something in chess and you won't see it, until a couple months later, and then you'll look back and you'll say, oh yeah, I think that book was helpful. But in the mean thing, if you want to do serious improvement, I know a lot of people like this because they will hire coaches. They'll say, hey, I want to hire you. I'm going to study for 6 months. And you're like, okay, but when are you going to be playing chess? And they're not, So I think the playing, if you're studying 10 hours a week and not playing at least once or twice a week, your improvement is going to be, not as good. You're not going to have it. There's a guy, Neil Bruce, very famous on Twitter. Great guy. He has a lot of variants between Twitter posts, and I don't know if you ever heard of him. He does this flashcard study. He goes for different books and picks out the best books and stuff. And, I mentioned to him, how's the playing? We've had a couple of Twitter conversations. I think he does play once a week. I'm not sure, but he wants to make master. I forget what his rating is. It might be he's 50 something, and I think he was maybe 1800. I'm not even sure if he's that high. I could be wrong. So he has an incredible goal. Someone who's 50 something to gain 400 points. I think one of the GMs was like making a bet with him, like that he can't do it. I forget who it was. So in any case, though, someone like that, in my opinion, and again, maybe he'll prove me wrong, should be playing at least twice a week, if not more. You want to get to playing. And he's like, well, I don't have time for it. And maybe he doesn't have time for that, but then maybe you got to adjust your goal, because I don't think 1 week's enough for the type of improvement he's going to make. I don't, it's going to be incredible if he does it. But he's going to have to put it, and not only that, but now he's also doing other stuff, coding and this and that. And yes, he's going to make math. We'll see. Again, no one will be happier than me because I'm his age. So if he can get him 400 points, that's great. So I think adjusting the level is important, and guiding the instruction based on the level. Is it enthusiasm? Is it work? How much time does a person have for work? And you're not making judgments. You're not like, well, listen, you can't study 3 hours a week on chess, then you're a bad person. You're kind of working with your student and just making sure his goals are realistic to the amount of work he's putting in. Just like, again, my physical trainer example of, physical trainers telling me you can eat whatever you want and you only have to walk, 20 minutes a day and you're going to lose a ton of weight. I'm going to be like, okay, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So, and the final thing, I think also, of coaches is recognizing that failure is a part of the lesson and dealing with the failure, and not just failure in terms of recovering from lost games. But I know when I started out, when I wasn't as experienced, I'd give a kid a puzzle. And again, this is the type of novice kid who you really want to be enthusiastic. And I'd be almost afraid, if he failed. Oh, he couldn't solve the puzzle. Oh, no. Now it's more like just explaining to him that puzzle is a good puzzle for you, because even though you failed, you learned from it and you tried. And that's the main thing. And kind of getting that sense. So you have to challenge your students, but also let them learn from the failure and realize, it's not a bad thing. No matter who you are, even Magnus Carlsen, there's going to be puzzles that you're going to fail at. And that's okay. You're learning. And obviously chess games also you're going to lose. And that's okay. That's part of the process and part of the game.
Funny story about chess puzzles. I was listening to Daniel Naroditsky, GM, and he was speaking. There's like one episode of his podcast. It's called Chess Crib. I mentioned it. I'm not sure what happened. He recorded one episode with Robbie Adamson. I don't have it pulled up in front of me. I think he might be an FM, but they were talking about cheating. All right. It was only one episode that they recorded. I don't know if it pod faded or if they just, if they're just kind of slowly building it up. I hope there's more. But anyway, he was saying, because you were talking about chess puzzles and students, he now has students who are cheating during a lesson.
I've had that.
You've had, all right, hold that thought because I want to hear your story. But what Naroditsky was saying, he goes, I'm giving an online lesson and he goes, I'm giving students a puzzle. And he goes, they're using a chess engine during the lesson. I mean, we're talking about during tournament play. This is during a lesson that Crazy. You're paying money for. And because he goes because we're talking about whatever stupid cheating. At one point, students would share their screen, or one student shared a screen, and he's like, well, why do you have a chess engine running? And of course, it was one of those, oh, well, it was just to just as a supplement, just to kind of check my, you know what I'm saying? So he's getting students cheating during lessons now. This is how bad it is. But I didn't expect you to say, oh, yeah, I go through that too. Well, tell me about that.
So one example, I was teaching a kid who was working with me and a top coach, like someone who, I don't want to mention his name because I don't know, he's very private, but he's trained some of the very best. Right? So we were doing a thing where and we know each other well, me, the coach. And so I would be at the guy's house. The coach would kind of, deal with the kid online and stuff. And one of the things that would be done is he'd give examples. From different games, this and that. And the idea is the kid would work on them. And then we'd, there might be like one example, it might be a couple examples. And then we'd get together and we'd go for the analysis together. Um, and me and the other coach very quickly realized this kid is solving like whatever puzzle you give him. They could, because we'd get more and more difficult puzzles if he's solving them, and it doesn't matter what the difficulty level he gives solving it. And then I'd come over, and he wouldn't know anything. He'd be like hanging pieces, and I'm like, how did he solve this? So we're like, okay, something weird's happening. So the coach came up with a clever idea. He gave him a puzzle, and this was a scenario. I was in my opponent was in massive time pressure, so I played a move while not sound, would get him to, overstep the clock because it would create complications. So it was a good practical try. And needless to say, the kid didn't get it. It's because that's something you couldn't use a computer for because it was an unsound move. But any, one who was solving the puzzles that he was solving would be able to get it. So we confronted him on it and stuff. But he's just one example. Now, why someone would do this? In this case, he was a kid. He was a teenager. So maybe, just being a teenager, he's kind of foolish. But yeah, why someone's going to pay for lessons and then cheat, and it's just insane. But you do get like crazy stuff, particularly with homework. I know Agard was talking about a lot of people. Agard has this thing where it's like a video thing, killer chess training, and he's a strong GM trainer, and he gives homework, very hard homework, and checks it. And he says, he said this online, there are a lot of people who cheat with it. And why? I don't know. Why would you? It's not a cheap thing, killer chess training. So who knows, right? Crazy the way the mind works. Talking about the exercise and all the stuff, I know we kind of mentioned this. I was blown away listening to the Chicken Chess podcast. That's done by Magnus II, Peter Grandmaster Nielsen, Ron Fresnet, and Jim Gustafson. And this episode blew me away because they were reviewing, Gustafson was reviewing GM Ramesh's book. GM Ramesh is the trainer of all these many of the top Indian prodigies who are starting to become the world's best players. Pragananafand and Gukesh, I believe, and I think Saran, and we can go on and on. All these Indians who are top players, he deservedly is getting credit for. Or getting some of the credit. Obviously, no matter who the coach, the credit always mainly goes to the player because the coach gets too much blame or too much credit generally. But in any case, Ramesh has done a good job with them, and he came out with a book on calculation. Now, what's funny is I happen to have been looking at this book. I did get this book, and the examples are so tough. Just going for the solution would take me like a while. So not even solving it, just like, okay, here's the solution, and I'm going to need like 15 or 20 minutes to understand it because it's like dense variations, one thing after the other. So when I'm listening to this podcast, I was happy to hear that GM Gustafson said, well, I can't solve any of the puzzles in this book. And they're rated, he puts rating ranges like, 1,400 to 1,700 or this or that. And yet Gustafson's saying, these puzzles are much harder than that. And so it led to a discussion of does solving tough puzzles, like really challenging puzzles, like Ramesh has in his book, is that helpful? And, surprisingly, the three GMs mostly were like, no, it's not necessary to solve these tough puzzles, which is, this goes against, I've read a lot about chess and, I've talked to trainers and that goes against like what most of the top trainers have been saying, Botvinnik, Agar, Dvoretsky, you could go down the list. It's tough puzzles. And yet, they were saying that that it's not really as necessary. It's kind of overblown. They made it seem they didn't know what club players were doing with some of these books, like why they would need to study such tough puzzles. Nielsen mentioned that Carlsen doesn't like doing tough puzzles and isn't very good at them, whatever that means, I'm sure. But then Nielsen really blew my mind away when he said that, and I wish I had the exact quote. Anyone who wants to see it, it's episode 26 of Chicken Chess Podcast. It starts around the 40-minute mark or 45-minute mark, somewhere around there. But Nielsen says that he thinks a player who plays a lot of bullet, I think in addition to over-the-board chess, is going to help his chess more than solving these puzzles, or as much. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, which was, mind blowing to me because obviously, I don't think playing bullet should be all that helpful. But what I will say, I'm thinking about it more. I did learn a lot, not so much from bullet, more from blitz, where not the actual playing. The playing, okay, gives me some experience. It's not the worst thing. But where I think it's very helpful is analyzing the game afterwards. So when you analyze the game afterwards, when you analyze your speeches game, which I do all the time because I'm just curious. I'm like, oh, where did we leave opening? Oh, was that move I played correct? Where did I blunder? I just have a natural curiosity about my game. So when I play 5-minute chess, and I do play quite a bit, I'm always looking over the games afterwards. And I do think it has helped me improve, certainly my openings and in general. So I think that's maybe neglected when people say you shouldn't play bullet chess, because a lot of the trainers and coaches, not all, but a lot of them are very harsh about it. I do think if you're studying it afterwards, it might be a major thing, because if you study openings that aren't based on games you played, it's harder to remember them. But if you're like playing online a lot of games, first off, the number of games you're getting in is greater also, which is very important. So you're getting a lot more games. And, then you look them over, it's going to have a personal effect. So if I know someone's been playing a certain line against me and I keep seeing it, when I look it over after the game, I'm going to remember that because I know that's being played against me. So I think in that sense, bullet and blitz could be helpful. As far as the exercises go, I always thought solving challenging puzzles would be, we're talking really challenging, would be a good way to go. But maybe, taking into account what they said, thinking it over, my own experience. I mean, you definitely want challenging puzzles. You don't want puzzles, if you solve it easily, what's the point? But, this really over-the-top challenging puzzle, maybe it's overrated in terms of its help. And Gustafson even said, I think, that it could hurt you.
Yeah, see, the thing with bullet chess, and I just want to define, like, bullet chess, we're talking like, what, under 3 minutes a player, I guess? Or 3 minutes or less, yeah. I mean, I know for me, I don't even enjoy that. Like, that's not even, like, what's the point? It's almost like silly. Blitz, I think, like, I like playing blitz, but with an increment, like 5 minutes with a 5-second delay, or maybe that's too slow to be considered blitz. I don't know. But even 5 minutes with a 3-second delay. But you hit on, I think, what is the most important point, which is that you have to review your games after. You can't just kind of mindlessly go from one game to the next. And, and I think there are certain benefits of blitz. Like, let's say you play without an increment, it does help you think in time pressure situations. It does help with tactics and openings. And as somebody once said, even in classical time controls, there are going to be moments where you are in time pressure. So it is good to do some blitz. I mean, I think you would agree what's silly are people playing, every night until 1 a.m. for 3 hours and just kind of mindlessly going from one game to the next. And there's, no learning involved. You see a lot of that.
If they're doing it just for fun and to relieve stress, it's okay. But they shouldn't fool themselves that in itself is going to make them a strong player. But I do say, I don't know a lot of people. There are people who have said it, but I don't think enough is made of the fact that you have these powerful computers and you can review your blitz game. Now, back when Botvinnik and people were putting down blitz, they didn't have that. Now we all have it. So we have the game score, we have the supercomputers that'll tell us where we went wrong. I mean, it's obviously a very useful tool. And a lot of the top players today are people who played blitz like that. Carlsen, Nakamura, you can go on and on. And I know, looking back, things that I think have helped me, that's definitely one of the things, just playing blitz and looking over my games, maybe even the major thing. It also gets into, GM Gregorian wrote an article about why bullet is bad. He actually wasn't as harsh on blitz. It was mainly bullet. And he said, he referenced Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, this book by Daniel Kahneman.
Daniel, I think it's Kahneman, yeah, or something like that.
Yeah, Nobel Prize winner, great book. And he talks about System 1 and System 2 thinking in that book. System 1 is kind of intuitive. So, obviously when you're playing bullet, you're all in System 1 mode. You don't have time to think. So you're just like, you just play the first move you can see as quickly as possible that, you're just kind of letting your hand move. Where system two thinking is sort of the thoughtful part, where you're working things out. And he mentioned in an article, even in Blitz, you have a little bit of system two thinking. Obviously, you have much more if you're playing at a game, an over the board game like at your club is a lot of that system two. So basically, to improve, you really want to work on your system two, because that'll form the neurons and stuff. Will be developed so that eventually goes into your system one thinking, where it becomes automatic, that you have the right habits and you immediately see things that are good. So if you're a weak player or an inexperienced player, and all you're doing is playing bullet, you're never really forming the correct habits. You're just playing the first thing you can see, and that, according to this article by GM, I think it's by GM Gregorian, is going to hurt your chess in the long run. And I could definitely see that. I could definitely see. Again, I think, if it's done the wrong way, it could definitely be harmful. And, again, if it's done the right way, where even bullet games, if you analyze them afterwards, it's probably a way where it won't be harmful. But, it's not recommended, let's say, when you could play Blitz with an increment, or even better, a slow game.
I want to ask you one more thing, Brian, that
Sure.
I want to touch upon. So my thing, this is my opinion, I'm wondering if you agree or disagree. There's a theory, or there are theories out there, that you should study certain phases of the game depending on what your rating is. Like, for example, if you're a beginner, you should only study this. If you're 1200, you should only study this. A common one that I don't agree with, don't study opening theory until you're 1800, things like that. Do you agree with that? Like, what's your thought about that? Because my thinking tends to be, you need to study all phases of the game, regardless of your rating. Now, how you do that, what that looks like, is going to be different. The way a 1200 player is going to study openings is going to be different from the way a 2200 player would. But you still need to cover all phases of the game. Just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, we're totally aligned on that. As a coach, I like to, in a lesson, I really try to cover, a little bit of end game, a little bit of opening, a little bit of showing them a great game or something, and as well as play and things. But I think you got to cover everything. You do have to study opening. This is where this is where the important thing goes, though. You have to recognize, especially with beginners, the opening study. So, like for a ranked beginner, you're not going into deep variations or anything. You're teaching them the importance of development. You might show them, okay, if someone moves their F pawn, you should be looking at, Queen H5 check, things like that. So you're showing them, like the basics of the opening, and the basic traps and pitfalls and things you should be worried about. And then the irony, and any coach will tell you this, I know you've done some coaching, is then, like, most of the students don't even listen. You're like, I told you to develop your pieces. I have this one student, I have more than one, and again, I think any coach has students like this. We do the lesson. He gets some really good puzzles, solve them. I'll have them play me in end games, things like that. The kid's good, he does well in the lesson. So then towards the end, we'll go, okay, let's go see you play online. Let's see how you play. And he does everything exact opposite. Like, he's not bringing his pieces out. Time and again, get your pieces out. There's nothing to do. He's not checking that he's safe in the square to go to. And it's like, and I tell him, I go, just before you solve that really tough puzzle, now we played a game and you put your knight right in front of the queen where it could be taken. What's going on? And he has no answer. But it's, that's actually, I think, one of the hardest things teaching scholastic chess. And I think every scholastic chess teacher would tell us, not obviously the ones who are dealing with advanced prodigies who are winning tournaments at, your club or something like that. But, that's the other funny thing. People at your club, they think like all kids are great, because generally if a kid's serious enough to come to your club, let alone, all these other, continental chess, whatever, they're generally really good, because if they want to come to your club, they have to kind of show something. They have to be really interested. Their parents drive them out. It's like a major thing, so the people at your club are going to see all these talented kids. Now, people who do a lot of scholastic chess like me, and teach in all these schools and everything, we see the other kids, and there's like, 100, and you're trying to, you're trying to get them good. And again, a lot of times the hardest thing is getting them to just do exactly what you told them. I remember I started working with a new coach at the school, and he said, today I'm just going to teach them, to play the classical development, E4, D4, knights out, bishops out, castle, and then they'll know how to play the opening. And I go, okay, you give your lecture. And he gave the lecture. It was a very good lecture. I went over that. And then I go, okay, now behold. And of course, none of the kids did it. They're all doing, different stuff, not bringing their pieces
Right,
out.
scholars mate, right? Because when I was working with kids, it was everybody wanted to do the scholars mate, the 4-move mate.
But they don't even do that. Some, if you're really dealing with the real beginners, like you'll get at a typical after-school program, they don't even know. A lot of them don't even know. The kid who knows scholars mate, unless you stop it, is going to win the tournament, because the other kids, they're just, they're doing all the beginner stuff. They're moving all their pawns. They're moving the same piece over and over again when they have undeveloped pieces. They're not castling. All the basic stuff.
Yeah, they're opening with like A4, H4. Yeah.
You explain it to them. You say, well, if you play A4, you're only getting the rook out, and it's probably going to get picked off by a bishop. You give them, you bring the 2 center pawns out, you get more pieces out, you control the center. You show them it very logically, and they listen and they agree, and you say, okay, great. And then they go play, and it's A4. And you're like, what's going on here? I just told you. And then they lose also,
You agree with kids, though, that you have to teach them, if they're going to play in tournaments, that is, you have to teach them the scholars mate, the 4-move mate, only because other kids are going to try it on them. Like when I was teaching privately a while ago. Right now, I'm kind of on hiatus from that, but I always taught them. I said, I don't want you to play this yourself. Okay. But I go, you need to be aware of this, because I guarantee you, half of your opponents or more are going to try this on you. And I was right. And like, there were some tournaments, like, especially in the lower sections, like 80% of the games, everybody was trying the scholars mate. So they have to know it to defend against it.
That's definitely something you should be teaching beginner kids, how to stop it, how to set it, because they are going to come up to that. And so that's very important. Yeah, the opening study, making it full circle now. It depends what you're studying. Obviously, you shouldn't do too much, because at the lower levels, let's say below 2000, certainly below, or well below that, you shouldn't be doing too much opening study, because it's probably not going to help you much. I mean, you can know everything about the Ruy Lopez. Eventually, it's not even just like if you know everything about the Ruy Lopez and you play someone, let's say, you're 13, 1400, whatever it is, chances are your opponent doesn't. So at some point, he's going to play some move that's not in the Ruy Lopez, but it's probably not going to be a losing move. It might just, maybe he doesn't develop a piece as quickly as he should. And then, already, now maybe you have a slight advantage. And if you don't know the other stuff, you're not going to be able to cash in. It's funny, Magnus Carlsen, he played G5 in this Title Tuesday event against all these GMs, and he's crushing them, one by one. Eventually, Mamedarov resigned rather than face G5, he said, because it was so disrespectful. But the point is, these were all top GMs. Now, if openings are as important as you would think, then you shouldn't be able to get away with playing G5, right? They should be able to crush you. And, even if you're Magnus Carlsen, because these are still strong GMs, and yet they didn't know how to handle it. So the openings, you want to, it's good, a coach should be touching upon that. And a student, I think the other thing, a coach shouldn't in lesson be just going through the variations. He should be explaining the pawn structures and the general ideas behind the opening, and then looking at your games and explaining it. But sometimes I do get students who want me to just like give them lines to memorize or something and spend the whole lesson, okay, now on bishop takes c6 in the Ruy Lopez, this is what happens, and then you play this, and blah, blah, blah. I tell them, if you want to do that, go online, or get your chess base or something. I'm not going to tell you anything better than what's on there. It's going to give you now as a coach, I could go over, a limit, since they're paying, by the hour or whatever it is. Whatever I cover in lesson is going to be very limited compared to what you could do on your own, going for these computer programs, using these databases, and trying to memorize the lines on your own, whatever you're doing. And then when you come to lesson, the idea of the coach is then you'll point out the things you don't understand. You might play out the positions against him, things like that. That's where the lesson would come in. But in terms of pure opening, that's not really for a lesson, and again, because, the coach should be going over the other stuff, all the stuff that happens after the opening. But you do have to touch upon the basics of the opening. And, and in the end, if the player knows how to play the opening, he'll get out alive and he'll have a playable position.
Yeah, and what you were saying before, this is something Dan Levin touched on. After E4, E5, no one's playing Roy Lopez's anyway. They're all doing the Giuoco piano, the Italian game, right? I mean, I'm not really an E4 person as white, but that's what I've heard that from Dan and other people. Nobody really plays the Roy Lopez anymore, at least at the amateur level.
I mean, if I go for my games, I have some openings I've played a lot for years and years. And if I get to move 10, and again, because I play so much speed chess, I have thousands of games that I can go through of mine in these lines. And generally, I move 10, I'm in a position that is new or close to new, and I know what to play. It's just that, that's the way it works most of the time. It's very rare you get to move 10, even if you know your theory, like a higher theoretical line, your opponent has to know it also. So, it's definitely overrated in terms of openings, the importance of it, because people, they'll know they're going to get, like if I'm going to play you, I know, and I'm black, I know we're going to get in London. So, you kind of feel like, okay, if something goes, I got to know that opening, I got to know how to play in London. But, the game would more likely be decided much later, if I mess up in the end game or the middle game or something, that's probably what's going to happen, whatever happens in the London. There are cases though,
And with the London too, it's, because the common criticism, because I get this all the time, is, it's the same positions all the time with it. Not really. Not really. And then when they say, the thing with the London, as far as your chess growth, you're going to get the same positions. Well, isn't that why you study any opening? Don't you study any opening because you want to get a position that you're familiar with? But when we do it with the London, then it gets criticized. But if you're studying the Sicilian because you want to get that same position so that you know what you're doing, that's okay. So I think that's true for all openings. But, very, very well said, Brian. So I think that about does it. So, Brian, always a pleasure. You're definitely going to be a regular because it's just always a good hang. We always have a good talk.
Well, as I said, anything, I don't have a big ego, so I'm like, if people want to listen to me, that's great. But, I'm willing to help you in any way possible because I appreciate your podcast and what you're trying to do here. So any way I can help, absolutely.
Yeah, no, and you're really in tune with like the amateur player, just, not as a player, but also as a coach. So you kind of deal with that whole ecosystem. So Brian Karen, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And for those of you at home, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.